Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers. Well, we enjoy award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's ever captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine to do it. But each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, and I hope you turn in and listen to that also, joins me on this journey, this amazing profiling journey, as we look at interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world, while enjoying our favorite Casaro wines. Now, I've got my wine today. It's our new cold case. Yes, a True Crime and Wine cold case. But we'll talk about that a little later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling in the life and crimes of Joseph Nasso, also known as Crazy Joe, a serial killer who was convicted of 4, linked to 6 murders, and now unwittingly confessed to over 24 more. And I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a really unique case with lots of twists and turns. How do you feel about a serial killer who decades after he committed his crimes is now confessing them?
Well, John, one thing we're going to talk about is this is an older gentleman, right? So a lot of this happened when he was older, with the conviction, with the admissions of the additional victims, maybe to clear his conscience before death. Maybe he wants people to know what he actually did, and not to put that on someone else to take credit for. So I don't know. I think it's a very interesting case, and we're going to find out a lot about Joseph Nasso.
Yeah, and one thing we will learn, you're exactly right. He didn't want another serial killer to take credit for one of his victims.
Okay, John. So as we get into this case about Joseph Nasso, we, with the profiling you've done, that's what makes this show different. We always talk about the formative years. What was their life like? What was their childhood like? How were their parents? And Joseph Nasso, at 9, 10 years old, his mother had caught him trying to wear her underwear. Now, this reminded me a little bit of Ed Gein, right? Because we know that he was kind of into that. I don't know about this young of age, but, because his mom caught him doing that, she berates him, she beats him, she calls him her daughter, she nicknames him Miss Josie. And I think from a mother's perspective, we want to try to understand our children, right? So instead of calling them names, berating them, we have a discussion around why maybe that behavior is occurring. But this is just the beginning. And John, this is 9 or 10 years old.
Right. And, the way that she responds to it, I really think it formed his opinion about what he was doing and how he was doing it. And again, she didn't kind of in a maternalistic, motherly way say, maybe Joe, that's not appropriate, or, had a discussion, like you said. She went totally kind of berserk. Really, and what child likes to hear their mother berate them, call them names?
Terrible.
It just not good. We find out later that he was a voyeur, and he would watch his mother having sex with other men and asking to be choked. He hated his mother. He believed she was a liar and a hypocrite. And this is really the very early stages of him hating women. I mean, really hating women, and hating women because he saw them use sex as a weapon, sex as a tool, and everything kind of painted, in his view, their whole life around what they did with men
Yeah.
and how they did it. He wanted to get back at her. He was so mad at her for, doing this, berating him and nicknaming him and having sex with other men and I guess ignoring him, that he actually strangled her bird to death to get back at her. So at a very, very young age, we see two really key indicators that we're going to see throughout his life. There are actually three. The first is his fascination with underwear. He keeps this fascination up until today, right?
Yeah.
His fascination with watching women and later photographing women, and then his method of killing is strangling, just like he did to that little bird. So again, we can see this sometimes with serial killers and how they're formed at a very early age, but three of these major indicators occurred at a very early age, and he continued the rest of his life with these characteristics.
I do find it interesting that he was watching his mother begging to be choked, and then strangulation becomes his method of killing.
Yeah.
So I don't, there's got to be, and then he kills the bird that way. Again, now animal abuse, right? Even though it was to get back at the mother, now you're killing an animal for payback. So a lot of indicators, gosh, John, and sometimes we see this at a very, very young age.
Yep, certainly do. He was born in 1934 in Rochester, New York. He served in the Air Force in the 1950s, and we thought he had a relatively harmless kind of young adulthood. He was married for 18 years, but then divorced. The couple did have a son who was diagnosed as schizophrenic, and Naso cared for him really for a good portion of his life.
So do we know anything about the marriage? I assume it was good. I mean, until the divorce happened. And then again, he serves in the Air Force, lives a pretty, I guess, normal life until the divorce.
Or normal for a serial killer.
Ooh,
because
good
that's
one,
one of the things we're going to see. And this case is just like so many others that I've worked on. When you have gaps in a timeline, and we're going to talk about that later, there's only one way that serial killers fill those gaps.
Yeah.
And we're going to see that. So indicators were nothing really abnormal until we start looking back and really tracing back some of his homicides. But let's kind of start off his career. He was a freelance photographer. How many of these guys were photographers? But Naso actually was a photographer in that he was paid for it. He earned a living as a photographer. And we're going to see this later on, how he doesn't like other people who claim to be photographers when they're really just amateurs. In the 70s, he lived in San Francisco and attended various colleges. In the 80s, Piedmont, California. In the 90s, 99 through 2003, was in Sacramento. And in 2004, up until the time of his arrest in 2011, he lived in Reno, Nevada. So he moved around a little bit, but what we're going to see when we start geographically profiling him is the murders followed him everywhere he went.
So that's one of the things you're going to talk about when we're doing the profiling of the serial killer. So what do we know about him now? Kind of a bad childhood, or at least he hated his mother, probably was was exposed to things he shouldn't have been exposed to at a young age. At a formative age, at a formative years age.
Yep.
So we have that. Then you have animal abuse, killing the bird. No criminal history, right? Married, went to the Air Force, nothing at that point.
Not yet, but we're going to actually find out that there were some petty crimes. We're going to go back and look at that. Mental health issues. Now, I didn't start thinking about this until pretty deep in the case when I discovered that his son had been diagnosed. If the son was diagnosed with schizophrenia, was that maybe inherited? I mean, there was a reason people called him Crazy Joe. So, I mean, certainly we know he was narcissistic. We know he was a sociopath. He had all of the traits and characteristics of a serial killer. But when we're kind of going down our checklist there, we can certainly check at least verbal abuse by the parent. I think we can check mental health issues. Physical characteristics. He really wasn't an attractive guy and lost his hair pretty early on. I think that may have had something to do with it. Animal abuse, we simply, already saw that. And we're going to see some petty crimes here manifest himself. As a matter of fact, he ended up having a long history of petty crimes, like shoplifting. And he committed these crimes until he was in his 70s. So we're talking about decades of crimes. And as a matter of fact, it's one of these low-level crimes. Do you remember the other serial killer that we did that was captured in the motel room, Brasher, who was the yogurt killer? Well, it was cops doing something as simple as running a license plate and finding out that he was there in a stolen car. So you have this killer that has all of these murders, but they're going after him for his stolen car. You have this serial killer who now is being tied to dozens of victims and even more rapes over the years. But in the end, it ends up being a very low-level shoplifting of, can you guess what?
Oh, my gosh, underwear?
Yes, underwear. That ends up bringing him down. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. But I told you, the petty crimes really last his life. The shoplifting, the fascination with underwear, and we're going to see his fascination with strangulation also last his entire life.
So, John, I have a question about these. When you have serial killers like this that would commit these petty crimes, is it a level of excitement? Is it just out of boredom? Is it just to see if you can get away with something? Is it because you don't want to buy underwear because you're a man? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think, to me, it's a level of a thrill. Cheap thrill, if you will. I'm not going out and killing someone tonight, but let me see if I could get away with this petty crime. There's been many, many serial killers that when they actually get caught and they get arrested, just like the serial killer I captured, he was arrested several times for petty theft. He had plenty of money. He didn't need to go out and steal those items. It was simply a thrill to him. Another way to go, look at me, I'm smarter than you, and I can get away with this crime. Matter of fact, with my serial killer, we found out he stole many, many things from the stores on my beat because we actually found he gave them to prostitutes as gifts. So, again, that thrill of, look at me, I can steal and I can get away with it, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, the thrill of just knowing that he's not being captured for any of this. All right, John, let's talk about his first victim, Roxanne Rogish, or what we know of, 1977, white female, 18 years old. Prostitutes, we're going to see this again in his crimes and who he picks up and who he lures. But luring is another thing that I think he starts to do, and he does this by using a modeling ad.
Yeah, and he's a photographer, so he legitimately was taking photographs of women. Matter of fact, we find out later he actually rented an apartment where he would take the women to photograph them, especially during the years when he was married. But I want to point out one other thing before we really get into Roxanne here. The alliteration. Roxanne Rogasash. RR. Now, this is going to really play a huge role in this case. And this is why, in addition to calling him Crazy Joe, we call him the alphabet killer. And let's look at the pattern here with the women he kills and their names. So this is 1977, so very, very early on. He did strangle her with 4 pairs of pantyhose. One of them was from his ex-wife, or at that time, his wife.
Oh my
But,
gosh.
hey, tip, don't use your wife's pantyhose to kill somebody. They actually tracked the DNA back to her,
Wow.
and that was one of the things that really got him. So again, he strangles his victim. He dumps her body in the weeds off of Highway 101 in Marin County. Marin County, a beautiful area just on the other side of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. She was discovered less than 24 hours later, so it was not that long. Now, we're going to get into, decades later, we're going to get into this top 10 list that was found in his house and that was coded. And law enforcement really didn't know what the coding meant. But as he was tied to these cases over the period of years, Roxanne was actually listed on there as number 3 on the top 10 list. There was a map that he kept, kind of like the hunter. Remember the big game hunter and his map? Well,
Yep.
Joseph also kept a map, and there was a pin on it, and there was a note by the number 3 that said girl near Laguntas. And that's where her body was found. So we're going to see when all of this evidence starts to come together decades later, right? We're in 1977 now. He's not arrested till 2011.
Yeah. Wow.
But we see that's his first victim that we know of at this point. We're going to find out there were actually earlier victims later on.
So, John, based on what you said, the alphabet killer, second victim, Carmen Colon, CC, 1978, white female, 22 years old, again, prostitute. Same name as the Rochester, New York victim.
Yeah, we're going to talk. I keep saying later. This show may go for 5 hours.
Right.
But we're going to talk about other potential murders that he's tied to. And in one of the most eerie, I don't even know if I'd call it coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I'm a cop.
Same.
I've been a cop for over 40 years. But somehow, some way, this woman in 1978 had the same, not just initials, but name of an earlier victim from the early 70s where NASA was also a suspect. So we'll get into that. Yeah, this case has so many interesting twists and turns. And as you start to put together this, the alliteration and the letters, how could that even be possible? Right?
What are the odds? Right?
Yeah. So
you think statistically, what are the odds?
Unless you're specifically looking for women whose first name and last name start with the same letter, which means there's tons of planning and preparation that have to go into each and every kill.
Oh, I mean, just already talking about this guy is so organized. I mean, methodical, planner, keeping the map, keeping the list, right? Just very organized so far. So
Carmen, he strangled her just like the others. She did have defensive wounds, though, unlike Roxanne. She was left partially nude, and she was dumped in the same basic area, Contra Costa County. And she was found by a deputy who wasn't looking for her. He was investigating a shooting of some cattle in the area. He had been called by a rancher and came across her body. Now, eventually, DNA linked Nasso to Carmen, and on one of his notes, he listed her on the top 10 list as the girl in Port Costa. Port Costa was right near where the body was found.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so he's labeling the location, labeling the number, understands his victims. Okay. Okay, so again, we get into the profiling. What are we seeing now? We're seeing that he strangles them, the pattern of how he's killing them. We just talked about the organization of him. The body positions, is he wanting them to be found?
He's really just dumping him. He doesn't care. Yeah. He's disposing him at this point. We're going to learn a little later on what he was doing. When he had them and was killing them, he would also pose them post-mortem and take photographs of them, and those were discovered later. All of the victims so far, and the majority of victims, white females, 18 to about 56, I think was his age range. Most of them, about 60%, if I remember right, were prostitutes. Mm-hmm. The others were aspiring models or actresses, and he would either meet them and offer them a modeling job, or he would run ads and they would respond, or in some cases, they would run ads and he would respond. Mm-hmm. So the photography was not only a way of making a living, it was a way for him to obtain his victims via several different routes. Several of the girls, we're going to learn out later on, were last seen with a man, and the description varied because the murders were spread out over so much time, but we're going to get into another part of his ritual a little bit later. Very, very organized, as you said. Physical evidence, he's simply dumping the body when he's done with it. The girls are being strangled. We do know that. We don't see, I think, in the first two murders, any sexual assault by either of the girls, but certainly we see a very, very unusual pattern developing with victims whose first name and last name started with the same letter.
Okay, John, so we talked a little bit about the MO, profiling some of the victimology, pattern of strangulation, the underwear, but let's talk a little bit more about the geographic profiling. His comfort zone seemed to be where he lived. So he would target women close to his house. What else do we know about this geographic profiling with Nassau?
Yeah, and we eventually learned that he actually rented an apartment in one of the buildings he managed, and that's where he'd bring the women. So he committed his crimes very close to home. And even when he went to dump them, he didn't go very far. We saw one body in Marin County, one in Contra Costa. He really just looked for easy pullouts where he would have quick access, drive in, dump the body. He didn't try to cover it up, bury it, disguise it in any way. And he would just get out of there, or he would dump them at a beach he could drive up to. One of his victims was in an orchard. Another one was by some cliffs. So it was somewhere he could easily get in, dump the body, and get out with little, if any, preparation, posing, staging of the body at all. He had already done that. Now he was just disposing. He had no more use for them.
So we know he targeted mainly prostitutes, and then we talked a little bit about like this ad he would put out as a photographer, right? And the alphabet being the alphabet killer. And I know we're going to continue to talk about this, but you and I spoke about the fact that he has now a pool of women who then can respond to this ad, and then he can then identify same initials, right? First and last name, because that's his game, right? So and we don't know why he chose a certain letter. Was there a reason? But he seems to be not only organized, but he's bringing them to him, right? He's bringing like at least 100 women we know that respond to these ads, and he's having a selection of who he chooses. I mean, John, to me that is just, it's wild to be thinking about his thoughts behind all of this.
Well, about 60% only were prostitutes. And where we see a lot of serial killers, all of their victims are prostitutes, or the vast majority. Only about 60%. And that is important in this case, because that means 40% of the victims willingly came to him or allowed him to come to them. Right? So either he placed an ad and they responded to it, hey, I'm looking for a model, or they placed an ad, I do modeling, I do nude modeling, here's my rate, that type thing. But we see his victims have both at this point, the first name and last name with the same letter. And do you know how difficult it would be to select only women with the same letter? It'd be almost impossible. So what does that tell us?
Yeah, it tells us that he had his choice of they would respond, like you said, and then he would be able to choose who his victim is. But you have to think from hundreds, right?
Of women.
Like it was like, it's like this, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like a hunter, right? Like they're coming to him, and then he's able to make his choices. There doesn't seem to be any sort of hesitation on his end. If you have the same first and last name letter, I mean, you're automatically in the pool of possible victims here.
Right.
Which is just wild to think about.
So he was, kind of, just to sum up his MO again, prostitutes and women that were aspiring actresses or models. Method of murder was strangulation. We do find out he did rape some of the victims, and later we discovered that he had sex with some of them after they were dead. Again, necrophilia with serial killers. Dumped along the roadside, usually photographed them, if not killed them, near his house. But this is what we find out a little later on. He was bringing these women in. He was taking pictures of them, and the ones he decided to kill, he would pose them next to mannequins and parts of mannequins, like an arm, a hand, a leg, or maybe the full mannequin, in order to make them perfect again. And this word perfect comes up in so many serial killer cases. When we talked about the New York Times Square killer, he was convicted of 18, but he admitted to 80 perfect murders. And again, these serial killers a lot of times only want to claim what they consider their perfect murders and disregard the others. So I'm thinking that he sees them, he hates women, he sees them as nasty, dirty, they're using sex as a weapon. He's going to make them perfect again, because after he kills them, he poses them with these perfect shape, perfect looking mannequins, and that's how he makes them perfect again. Once he does that, that's why he just dumps the body. He's got no use for it. Means nothing to him. It's just like trash, just like garbage. And he's just getting rid of it. Later on, he said he was called to kill, and he simply answers the call.
Oh my God, this guy's a real piece of work. And one other thing I was thinking about with him is he thinks women are nasty. He hates them. He, degrades them. But yet he has sex with dead victims. And I always wonder, like, do serial killers, they must have this idea in their head that, is it because the perfectionism isn't there for them? Like, I do wonder, and we don't have to talk, that we could probably do a whole episode about some of the things in language and that they use to describe certain things. But I am curious about how they feel about themselves, how they view their victims, and then they do something like this, pose them next to mannequin pieces to make them perfect again. Like, they're perfect, then he destroys them and then makes them perfect again.
Right.
It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, and it's all in their head, and that's why I told you many times, we don't try to put our morals and values and thoughts and background and characteristics and behaviors on these guys because you'll never figure them out, right? You'll
Right.
never figure out. When you start doing that, you start losing the case because you get away from the facts because you go, well, no one would act like that. Well, no one would think like that. And they do.
I like that you said you get away from the facts. Love that. Okay, Pamela Parsons, PP, 1993, white female, 38 years old, waitress, lives just blocks from Nassau, disappears on September 18th of 1993 after she works a shift. A body is found September 19th, naked in the remote Yuba County orchard. Again, strangulation, wrist and neck is bound.
Yeah, he did take a photo of her post-mortem where he posed her, and that was found glued to a piece of cardboard along with a newspaper clipping, and it was in his safety deposit box. We know that these serial killers keep newspaper clippings of their murders. They follow it on TV. They watch the news coverage of it. We had the highway strangler who was keeping many newspaper clippings in the glove box of his kill van, right? Where he was actually killing the people. Pamela was also number 9 on his top 10 list, and she was listed as the girl from Linda. So I'm not sure exactly what that referred to, but again, he had his own secret code, and I think that's why when investigators found the list, they weren't sure if he had killed any more than the 4, and they certainly couldn't tie him to it for quite a while. But look at when this homicide occurred. 1993.
Yep.
This is decades after the last homicide.
Yes, I was going to bring this up. Now that we're in the 90s, let's talk about this. You always mention the gaps. We also know that he was a rapist. So do you think there were, I don't think he went 20 years and did nothing, right? So I assume maybe some of the victims we know about now later on 2025, because we're going to talk about that. A lot of this has come out recently. Are these some of those victims, John, you think, from that time frame?
That's exactly. They're going to fill in the gaps. It's just like we've say all the time. When you see gaps in a serial killer's timeline, if they're not incarcerated, right?
Right.
Then they usually do not stop killing. They do not just all of a sudden turn it off and go, well, you know what? I've been doing this for 10 years or 20 years. I'll just go ahead and stop. That's just not the norm. And it certainly, we're going to find out, wasn't the norm here.
All right, so our next victim is Tracy Tafoya, TT, 1994, white female, 31 years old, a prostitute, last seen in 1994 in July in Marysville, California. Her body is found in 1994, dumped in Yuba County. She had been drugged, she had been strangled, she was partially clothed, and DNA, NASA's DNA was linked on, I assume, that clothing?
Yeah. Yep. On the clothing.
And then she's listed as number 10 on his list, prostitute, Marysville. And of course, he had newspaper clippings of this as well.
Yeah, and that's where she was last seen, in Marysville. So some of these are fairly easy to connect the dots. When he is that specific, when he takes a newspaper clipping and mounts it on cardboard and puts it in his safety deposit box, and the name ties in with the name on the top 10 list. He picked her up in Marysville, called her the prostitute from Marysville, kept the newspaper clipping. The DNA kind of seals the case. But in these 4 cases, it was very evident that when he was arrested, he was immediately tied to those 4 cases. And as we go further into this case, we're going to see how many more murders there actually were. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, it wouldn't be True Crime and Wine without the wine. We feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And it's fitting to share with you what I'm enjoying today and what Brandy has with her also. It's a glass of our newest true crime and wine branded wine. It's called Cold Case. And we actually have on the label a murder board. Now, this dry red wine is a blend of two Spanish varietals, Graciano and Tempranillo. The Graciano contributes plum and blackberry notes, while the Tempranillo kind of adds that spice, making the combination wonderfully drinkable. So, of course, there's no better way to enjoy an episode of True Crime and Wine than to have one of our Casaro wines. And as always, you can order it at casarowines.com, CASSARO wines, plural.com, and we'll ship it right to your door, and you can enjoy True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Okay, John. So we've talked to, we've done the profiling of Nasso. We've looked at his motive of killing, who he targets. But I am curious. We talked about the 4 victims, but how did he get caught? How did police stop his murder spree?
It's so wild. Sometimes you just get a turn of fate that opens up an entire case, and in this case, opened up cases from decades in the past. And remember I told you about that lifelong fascination with underwear?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nasso was actually on probation for shoplifting women's underwear in 2008, right? This is a serial killer, a rapist, a torturer, necrophilia with his victims, but it's the underwear that brings him down. And how it brought him down is he was arrested, convicted, and placed on probation in 2008 for the theft of underwear. In April 2010, Nevada probation and parole officers were doing a routine compliance check. Nothing more. They go into, convicted offenders' homes and make sure that they don't have prohibited items like firearms and ammunition. Now, this is 2010. Nasso is 76 years old at this time.
Wow.
He has been killing for all these years. Nobody knew about it. He becomes verbally aggressive and uncooperative to the point that the officers have to handcuff him and call for backup.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, searching for the weapons, because they're like, why? This is an underwear shoplifting case. What is he hiding? So as they search for the weapons, they find hundreds of photos of women in various stages of undress, many appearing to be unconscious or dead, and some of them bound. They found mannequins dressed in lingerie, and some with pantyhose tied around their necks. How did he strangle some of his victims?
Pantyhose around
the neck. Yep. They also found a handwritten list on the kitchen table containing 10 unnamed girls and geographic locations that the investigators later matched to both victims and dumping sites. They also found a key to a safety deposit box, which contains newspaper clippings about missing and murdered women, as well as a passport and driver's license belonging to one of the victims, Sarah Dillon, who was tied to him post-conviction of the 4 homicides. So during this, that handwritten note on the kitchen table is what we refer to as Nasso's top 10. And it was a cryptic list of women's names, like prostitute from Marysville, and the location of either where he picked him up or where he dumped him. And they also discovered journals of how he stalked his victims, sexually assaulted his victims, posed next to the mannequins, and then photograph them before disposing of their bodies.
Oh my gosh. I mean, can you imagine doing a house visit to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and then you come along with this plethora of what the hell is this?
Yeah.
I can only imagine what they're thinking, right?
We were looking for guns, and look
Yeah.
what we found. No guns, but so much more.
Ugh,
Mannequins with pantyhose tied around their neck, and the thousands of photos of the women. So
Ugh.
how many crimes has this guy committed? Remember we were talking about those gaps in the timeline?
Yeah.
Well, this
Yeah.
now fills all of those gaps and then some, because his continuation of raping,
Mhm.
and murder is being filled in now over decades. The guy's 76 years old when he's captured.
I mean, I'm thinking to myself, are they even, first of all, I think they could be investigating this guy for a very long time. I mean, we're talking about a 15 to 20 year gap of identifying where he was, what he was doing. But then you have to, I mean, I just think how much evidence they already have based on what they have already found, and enough to arrest him, of course, and then it stops the murdering. But John, he got away with this for a very long time. I mean, I don't even know if they'll ever be able to wrap their hands around everything this guy did.
Yeah, well, they started, with the evidence they found, they started linking him to some of these cold cases from the 70s and the 90s, and it was enough to arrest him and actually led to his conviction of the 4 murders: Roxanne Ragesh, Carmen Colon, Pamela Parsons, and Tracy Tafoya, all with the first name and last name with identical matching letters. And that's why Crazy Joe then became nicknamed the Alphabet Killer, because this is a really weird kind of thing. And how do you pick these victims? Well, you pick the victims. What are the chances of a girl showing up answering an ad and her first name begins with the same letter as last name? Well, what about if you do that 100 times, 500 times, 1,000 times?
John, I'm kind of seeing like a little maybe OCD, a little like maybe mental, like you said, like schizophrenia thing, like their pattern, right? I see like pattern. Maybe he's very organized and very pattern like, which you kind of see sometimes in OCD, same names, same area, things have to be the same in order for them to function. And I see some of this.
Yep. And we're going to see in just a little bit here where maybe his fascination with the double initials came from. Now, he did go to trial in 2011. He was charged with the murder of the 4 women that I mentioned. Police listed all 4 as prostitutes. They later introduced evidence identifying 2 other victims, Patton and Dillon. And so that's where the conviction on the 4 comes in. But the other 2 were also tied into the case in helping him prove it. He was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death in 2013 for those murders.
So we're going to get into someone by the name of William Noguera. How did he know Nasso, and what was their relationship, and why does it matter in this case?
Well, so now we're going to fast forward to 2023 when Nasso, who is on death row in San Quentin, meets another inmate on death row in San Quentin, and they form a relationship. And over the next 2 years, Noguera is going to coax information out of Nasso in order to try to get him to talk about the murders and hopefully get a confession. And Noguera is not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. While all this is going on, he's appealing his own murder conviction. He's appealing his own death sentence. He is making it where he is going to get information, and he believes if he helps prosecutors clear cases, that he eventually is going to be let out of prison. And so they form this relationship, and during this, Noguera kind of becomes his protector. You got to remember, at this time, Joe is 88, 89, 90 years old, right?
Oh
He
my
is
gosh.
very old, and he kind of needs protection
Yeah.
from assault, or in his head, he believed rape. He thought another inmate may rape him. And as a present, he gave Noguera a photo collage of 11 headshots of women encircling a self-portrait of him. And when Noguera asked him, how many of these women are alive? He said, they're all alive right here, and pointed to his temple. Now, Noguera was a brutal murderer. He was 6'1", 200 pounds, and he said he was totally creeped out by Nazo. I mean,
Mm,
scared. But he
wow.
continued to build that relationship. Nazo asked him if he would secure women's underwear,
Mm,
lipstick, a bra, and brutality porn, and Noguera secured all of it for him. And Nazo, in his 90s, was seen wearing the women's underwear under his prison outfit. So again, that underwear connection went from
wow.
the earliest days of his childhood.
I mean, what do you call that? I mean, do you just call it a fetish? Do you
A
call it,
fetish. Yeah.
okay,
Yep,
okay,
certainly. That was a lifelong, in his case, I think it goes from fetish to obsession, right?
okay, yeah.
Because we saw the underwear appear throughout the crimes. We saw it over and over again on the mannequins. We saw it in his house. We saw he shoplifted it. We saw he asked for it in prison. So I think it goes from fetish to obsession at that point.
Well, and it's almost like he can't live without it. I mean, he's
Right.
asking him to get it in, to have the lipstick, the pornography, to watch it, being able to wear the underwear at the same time. So, yeah, I don't know, a little bit of mental illness there, I think, on some of that. Who is Ruth Lynn Connis, and how is Ruth involved in this
Well,
case?
we didn't learn her name until
Okay.
Noguera worked Nazo for approximately 2 years. And just in 2025, that's one of the other reasons we're covering this case, did the story come out. It came out in a book. It came out in a television show of Nazo's confession. He wrote a 2-page confession on what he listed as someone from his top 10 list as the girl from Berkeley. We now know the girl from Berkeley's real name was Ruth Lynn Connis. He had met her
Mm.
in Berkeley. That's why he called her that. Brought her to his house in Oakland when his family was gone. She was a white female, 5'4", 120, good looking, brown hair, and she responded to one of these ads. Well, actually, it was the opposite. NASA responded to an ad that she put in. She said
Mm.
that she was a good looking woman who wanted nude modeling gigs. He reached out to her, brought her to his house in Oakland. He posed her topless on the couch. Says he didn't have sex with her, but choked her to death, strangled her. He then placed her in a garbage bag, put her in the trunk of his car, and drove to San Rafael Bridge and tossed her in the bay, and
Mm.
referred to her as the girl from Berkeley. Well, Noguera turns this information over to the police and said, this isn't just a top 10 list. He killed many other people. Matter of fact, he
Wow.
wrote a 300-plus page expose on Nassau and his confessions. And he said, listen, I think he killed at least 26, but he probably raped countless others, maybe killed others too. And police went back to the original search record from his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting tidbit, I don't think he called this a coincidence, they did find in his house 26 gold coins. So was he purchasing a gold coin for every one of the women that he killed?
Yeah, that just gave me goosebumps. There's got to be some correlation there. I mean, like you said, we don't believe in coincidences, so there's some correlation of 26 gold coins, and then the number 26 just keeps going to keep popping up. Did it are they starting to identify then people on this list? Are they starting to now focus on more victims?
That's what they're doing. So,
Okay.
basically, they had the top 10 list, from the day of his arrest. They had 4 victims that they immediately tied to it, 6 eventually. But now they have real information that they can work on to go back and test DNA, to look at evidence, to tie him to these crimes. And that's exactly what they start doing. And what they found is one of his earliest kills was in 1974. And it was actually a black female, 19. She was last seen at the Miami Court Apartments in Oakland while she was visiting her sister. She was listed on the top 10 list as the girl from Miami. Well, investigators, when they were looking into it, went to Miami, Florida, and couldn't find any potential victims in that time period. The cold case detective was walking around Nassau's apartment in Oakland and just kind of walking the streets and walked by an apartment called Miami Courts. He then figured out that's where Charlotte Cook, CC, was staying when she visited her sister. So girl from Miami meant the apartment complex, not the city. She was strangled and she was dumped also, and she washed up on Thornton Beach. So the MO fit. Nassau wouldn't confess to her or any of the other killings. Noguera said it was because he didn't want other inmates to know that he killed a black female because that may put him at risk.
Wow. Okay, Shirley Patton. This is another woman we identify, white female, 56 years old, lived in the San Francisco apartment building that was managed by Nassau.
Yep.
And then she was actually photographed by Nassau. Strangled in January of 81, stuffed into 2 garbage bags. Her body then washes ashore near Marin County Beach. And Cheryl Lee is listed as number 7 drive-in blonde on his top 10 list.
So you see how investigators are now piecing things together. They're finding out where these people came from, linking names to pictures, linking names to pictures of missing and dead women, linking the names and locations on the map and on the top 10 list to dead women and missing women. And so these numbers just keep on climbing. We also find that he's linked to other homicides. Sarah Dillon, who was a Bob Dylan fan. We don't think that was her name. She was listed as number 8, Dillon, on the top 10 list. She was a white female, 34. There was a Jane Doe, never identified female, who was found headless in Foss Creek in Hellsburg, but on the top 10 list, number 1 is girl in Hellsburg. So again, there's still a lot of work that would have to be done on some of these cases to actually link him with DNA to some of these crimes. But the pieces are starting to come together, and it really was from Noguera convincing him to confess, right, to him over a period of 2 years.
Do we know what the 1 through 10 represents? We know it's not the order they were killed, because if she's number 1 and this is 83, we know that's not why.
Yep.
Do we know why?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he ever said why. I don't think we know why the numbers corresponded or what they corresponded to. But again, it doesn't have to make sense to us.
That's right.
It only has to make sense to him.
So let's talk about Pamela Lamson, white, female, 19, aspiring entertainer. She disappeared on October 9th of 77 after the Oakland A's game. She was raped, strangled. Her body was then posed against a tree at Panoramic Highway, which is crazy to think about that, and then found by a jogger 2 miles north of Mountain Home Inn. So what do we know about Pamela?
Well, what we know is that Nasso at that time was actually a freelance photographer that worked occasionally for the Oakland A's. He would go and photograph games. He could have met her at the game. I think they were actually seen together by someone after the game.
Mm.
But the really interesting thing about Pamela Lamson is he only confessed, now to Noguera, not to anybody else, not to authorities, because he didn't want Rodney Alcala to get credit for this victim. He killed her, not Alcala. And how he proved it is he said, listen, I had fake A's credentials that I used to get in to be a photographer. And that kind of verified his story. He also was very detailed in saying he posed her against her after a tree and that she was getting all the entertainment and exposure that she needed. The family, the victim's family, also said they don't believe it was Alcala because they said that the person that was last seen with her was much older and more fit the description of Nasso and not Rodney Alcala. So here, in just a weird serial killer twist, we have Nasso saying, I'm not going to let Alcala take credit for my kill. And Alcala, by the way, is in the same prison in San Quentin as Nasso.
So wild. And he didn't want to take credit. I mean, again, it's like we don't know what's going on in their minds, but he wanted to make sure that he took credit for, I mean, I don't know. You don't confess to anyone else except, right? Except to
Another
murderer that he's talking to. And then hated Alcala. They're both in San Quentin prison. Calls him a fraud.
Yeah, because what was Alcala's ruse? A photographer.
Yeah, I lured
right?
them.
Remember,
Yes,
he would go to the beach and get young girls and photograph them. He would take aspiring actresses and models and photograph them both in L.A. and New York. But I don't think he did work for a very short period of time for, I think it was the L.A. newspaper, but it was a very short period of time. And Nasso said that didn't make him a professional. Right? Nasso was the professional. So he's mad that Alcala is claiming he's a professional photographer when he's not. And he's mad that Alcala is claiming his victim. Really, really strange. If you're a true crime lover and collect true crime t-shirts, wine glasses, stickers, hoodies, earrings, or other fashionable items, make sure you check out our True Crime and Wine logo apparel. And more at shoptruecrime.com or at the Casaro Winery website, casarowines.com. So check out our True Crime and Wine selection of all kinds of collectibles and enjoy them as you listen to our podcast of True Crime and Wine.
We talked about the initials, right? So what do they know or what are they thinking at this point or about the double initial murders?
Well, so back in the 1970s, 1971, 1973, you got to remember Nasso grew up in Rochester, New York.
Okay.
Nasso at that time was corresponding with a convicted rapist, Carl Chessman, C.C.
Okay.
Matter of fact, he was corresponding to him so much that he was invited to Chessman's execution. Now, Nasso lived in Rochester at that time and was considered a suspect in what they called then as the double initial murders. Carmen Colon, the exact same name as the other victim in California years later, Wanda Wakalowicz, and Michelle Menza. Now, let me tell you, these murders were never solved.
Okay.
Each girl was a prepubescent from a poor Catholic family. They had all experienced some type of issue at school, like bullying or falling grades. And it kind of gave rise to a theory the killer could have worked for the school or for a social service agency or some third party provider, right?
Right.
All the girls were raped and strangled to death and dumped in areas accessible by vehicle. Well, Nasso, throughout his career, raped and strangled to death women and dumped them in areas accessible by vehicle. Now, police did have a composite drawing of a person last seen with Menza at a fast food restaurant, and we know that both she and Wanda had eaten a hamburger about an hour before being killed. So who was it that they were with? Why did they take them to a restaurant? Remember, these were poor girls.
Yeah.
And so they might have jumped at the chance of somebody luring them with free food like a hamburger.
Well, and I'm just going to go back to like common statistics and say, what are the chances that these three cases are unsolved in the same area, both have double initials in their name? We're talking 71, 73, 73 when this happened. This is kind of like him getting into prime time. You know, the only thing that kind of threw me off a little bit was their age.
Yes, they were young girls, and so did he modify his behavior? We don't know. Was he practicing? Was he paying homage to Carl Chessman with the CC by only seeking out victims with double initials? So there's a lot. Now, Nasso was a suspect back then, but when they tested DNA found on Wanda, it didn't match his, and so they kind of dismissed it. But they also tested the DNA against a couple other known killers, including Kenneth Bianchi, and it didn't match either. So then authorities later on started to say, was the DNA any good? You know, it didn't come back to any suspect we tested. So we don't know about the double initial murders, and to this day they're unsolved, but it is very, very strange that these victims with first and last name with the same initial appeared in Rochester when Nasso was living there, and then we had victims with the same double initials out in California years later.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm willing to bet he was responsible for these three. Again, I just look at the fact that you're talking about the same letter in these three victims in the first name and last name, and the odds of that are just, I don't know what they are, but I can't, I'm going to say they're probably a little astronomical when you look at the statistic side of this.
And how many years are we going to look into the future maybe to get the technology that ties them to either the double initial murders or to many, many more murders, many more crimes that he's committed. So because there were thousands of photographs. And, you know, with technology, we're solving cases all the time. Maybe before he dies, we can tie him to those 26. Maybe we can tie him to 100. We don't know. But I will tell you, he's 91 years old today. He's still in prison. He's in a prison hospital. He's not confessed to authorities for any additional murders, but they continue to gather evidence on this horrific serial killer. Now, as we put a cork on this edition of True Crime and Wine, the podcast, I want to remind our listeners that you can follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. You can order our wine from CasaroWines.com, and then you can drink great award-winning wine and profile killers along with Brandy and I. Now, I think that wraps up our business for today. And with that, I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make this show possible. And we'll see you on our next episode when we present Robert Bardella, better known as the Kansas City Butcher who preyed on young men. Salute. I'm John Matthews. Thanks for joining us for True Crime and Wine.